Imagine waking up tomorrow to find your internet just completely shut off.
Right.
Your usual apps are all replaced by government spyware, and your country is basically preparing for endless war.
I mean, it sounds like some dystopian sci-fi novel.
Right, yeah, totally.
But for millions of people today, that is the literal everyday reality on the ground.
And that's exactly what we are getting into today. Welcome to today's Deep Dive. We are unpacking a huge historical transformation happening inside Russia right now.
It's massive.
It really is. I mean, the Kremlin just dropped interest rates to 14.5%, and they're scrambling to handle this crazy 4.6 trillion ruble budget deficit. And they racked that up in just 3 months.
Which is, yeah, it's wild.
So to keep the public in check while the economy burns, the state is building what the sources call a digital iron curtain.
Yeah, they're actively banning VPNs. They're punishing everyday users with these really strict 15 gigabyte international data limits.
Wait,
And 15 gigabytes?
yeah, just 15. And they are forcing citizens onto this state-controlled spy app called Max. And the big question is why, right? Like, why go to these extremes? Because Russia is shifting into a permanent war economy.
Exactly.
They're cranking up weapons production like 17 times over.
Yeah.
And they have to silence their own people to crush any domestic pushback. Plus, they're using this sneaky shadow diplomacy to rewrite the global rulebook.
Right.
So our mission today is to take this huge stack of intelligence reports and economic data we have and figure out how they are doing this, why it matters to you, and honestly, whether this whole system is just on the verge of total collapse.
Well, to understand how a country transitions to a permanent state of war, you really have to look at the very first step, which is silencing the domestic population.
Right, because you can't have protests while you re-engineer the whole economy.
Exactly. The government just cannot afford any internal dissent. And that necessity is what's driving this completely unprecedented internet crackdown.
So let's talk about the physical hardware they're using to do this.
Yeah.
The sources mention these things called TSPU boxes.
Yeah, the black boxes.
Right. The government is literally forcing every internet provider in the country to physically install these black boxes on their networks.
Yeah.
But what do they actually do? The reports use the phrase deep packet inspection.
Yeah.
How is that different from, normal internet block?
So, think of a standard internet firewall like a postal worker looking at a piece of mail.
Okay.
The postal worker looks at the outside of the envelope, sees a banned address, and just throws the letter away in the trash. That's basic web blocking.
Got it. Just looking at the label.
Right. But deep packet inspection is entirely different. The TSPU box actually rips open the envelope and reads the letter inside.
Wow.
Yeah, it analyzes your web traffic in real time. So if it sees that the data is encrypted, like the kind of data a secure VPN makes,
Right.
it identifies that specific pattern and instantly throttles or it just completely blocks the connection.
And the craziest part to me is that the local internet providers don't even have access to these boxes, do they?
No, not at all. The state censorship agency operates them totally remotely.
So they're literally centralizing the off switch for the entire internet.
Precisely. But, controlling the physical wires is really only half the battle. If people can still somehow download encrypted apps, the hardware block is kind of useless.
Right. So they had to attack the software side next.
Yeah. And that is where this new state-backed messenger app, Max, comes into play. The government is basically mandating its use everywhere.
It's wild. The sources say if you're a property manager running an apartment building, you are forced to communicate with your tenants through Max.
Yep. And university students are being told they have to download it just to get their class assignments.
But the technical breakdown of this app is, it's actually terrifying. Independent tech analysts tore the code apart.
Yeah.
And they found that Max actively probes the user's phone.
It's not just a messenger.
No, it doesn't just send texts. It scans the phone's registry to find the real IP address. And it actually searches the device to see if you have any VPN profiles installed.
Right.
It's essentially malware disguised as a group chat app, and it just sends a list of rule breakers directly to the state.
And the coercion tactics to get people to use it are brutal. Telecom companies have been ordered to slap extra financial charges on anyone who uses more than 15 gigabytes of international data.
Which is such a sneaky strategy.
Because if you use a VPN to read foreign news, it registers as international traffic.
Exactly. So they are literally hitting you in the wallet if you try to read independent media.
Yeah.
And then on top of that, Apple actually complied with demands to rip 761 different VPN apps from their Russian store.
Which is a huge blow, but when both the hardware and the software blocks fail to keep people quiet, the state just straight up pulls the plug.
Mass blackouts.
Yeah, mass mobile internet blackouts across entire regions. And the government officially says, oh, we need to scramble the signals to stop incoming drone threats.
Right, the drone excuse.
Yeah, but these shutdowns are happening in cities hundreds of miles away from any combat zones.
And the collateral damage to normal, everyday life is just intense. Like, the reports talk about people being stranded outside at night in freezing temperatures because they can't call a taxi on their phones.
Oh, yeah. Grocery store checkout lines are completely frozen because the credit card machines run on cell towers.
Like, teenagers and local business owners are just totally cut off from the modern world.
Yeah.
And meanwhile, the number of political prisoners has jumped to 12,217 people.
Right. And maintaining that level of repression requires an incredible amount of state resources. And frankly, it's creating this really dangerous friction at the very top.
Well, hold on. I want to explore that friction because it stood out to me. If the government is forcing local mayors, factory managers, business elites to all use a chat app like Max, an app that literally everybody knows is bugged by the secret police, how does any actual business function? You can't run a globalized economy if that corporate email is being read by the FSB.
No, you can't. And you're hitting on this major fracture point that analysts call the elite schism.
The elite schism.
Yeah. So the security services are the ones driving this total internet lockdown. But the business elites, the bank managers, even guys in the military, they are in an absolute panic.
Because they can't do their jobs.
Exactly. The security environment is so compromised that Russian military units actively refused to use the Max app because they said it was too unsafe for basic combat logistics.
Oh, wow. So it's like telling the CEO of FedEx to run his global shipping empire using like a plastic walkie-talkie because the security guard thinks phones are too risky.
That is exactly it. The security services are prioritizing absolute control over the most basic functioning of their own economy.
But why take that risk?
They're taking it because absolute control is literally the only way they can mask the massive economic crisis going on behind the curtain. The country has pivoted entirely to a war economy.
Right.
It's the classic guns versus butter model, and they have completely sacrificed the butter.
Yeah, the financial data in our sources is pretty bleak. The federal deficit hit 4.6 trillion rubles in just the first 3 months of 2026. And to give you some context on that, the finance ministry only planned to borrow 3.8 trillion for the entire calendar year.
Right.
So they blew through their whole annual credit card limit in 3 months.
Now, they did get a brief moment of relief recently because global oil prices spiked, which, gave them a quick injection of cash.
But it wasn't enough.
No, it couldn't stop the bleeding. Inflation is still climbing. It's sitting at about 5.95%. So the central bank was forced to lower interest rates to 14.5% to try to stimulate some kind of normal business activity.
But borrowing money at 14.5% is still a total nightmare for a normal citizen or a small business.
Oh, it's ruinous.
Yeah.
Because the state is funneling every available ruble straight into defense.
Right. The reports show artillery ammo production has jumped 17 times since 2021.
Which is insane.
They're running these factories 24/7 to churn out millions of shells. But the civilian side of the economy is just buckling. The data from April 2026 showed over 105,000 planned layoffs in the civilian sector.
Yeah, the civilian world is just starving for investment, for materials, and especially for human capital.
Wait, hold on. Let's unpack that.
Yeah.
You're saying businesses are laying off 100,000 people.
Right.
But earlier, the sources mentioned that the national unemployment rate is actually at a historic low.
Yes, it is.
How can everyone have a job if civilian businesses are firing everyone? That doesn't make sense.
Okay, so this is a dynamic called the labor shortage paradox, and it's basically the engine of their whole inflation crisis.
Okay, explain that.
So the defense sector has essentially been handed a blank check by the government, right? Defense factories are offering salaries that are double or even triple the normal national average.
Wow.
So normal businesses just cannot compete with that kind of money.
So like a local trucking company just loses all its drivers because they all go work at the tank factory down the road.
Precisely. So what does the trucking company do? They try to offer higher wages to keep the few guys they have left. But to pay those higher wages, they need to take out a bank loan.
And with interest rates at 14.5%.
But the loan is way too expensive.
Ah, I see.
So the trucking company eventually just goes bankrupt, and they lay off their remaining staff. And those laid-off workers, they get immediately scooped up by the defense factories.
Which just supercharges the inflation. Because now the defense workers have their pockets stuffed with cash. But since the trucking company and the local bakery and the clothing shop all went bankrupt,
There's nothing to buy.
there's nothing for those workers to spend their cash on. So the civilian economy just hollows out completely.
Exactly. And since the country can no longer innovate or produce normal consumer goods, it has to look outside its borders just to survive.
Right.
It has to steal technology, bypass sanctions, and actively disrupt its competitors globally. And this is what we call shadow diplomacy.
The tactics they use for this are actually fascinating. The sources highlight this concept invented by the Kremlin called the Baltic Scandinavian Macro Region, or BSM.
Right.
They basically set up these totally fake academic forums, like this thing called the Baltic Platform, specifically to lure in Western researchers and scientists.
Yeah, and the recruitment mechanism is so clever because it exploits academic openness. These intelligence operatives aren't inviting a NATO scientist to come talk about missile hardware.
Of course not.
Right. They invite an environmental scientist to, like, a luxury hotel in a neutral country to discuss ocean pollution or saving sea turtles in the Baltic Sea.
It's basically a Trojan horse. But instead of hiding wooden soldiers, they're sending researchers with clipboards to steal security secrets.
Exactly. Once they build that friendly relationship over a totally harmless topic, the operatives slowly start shifting the conversation. They might casually ask the scientist to review a paper on port infrastructure or shipping lanes. And before the scientist even realizes what's happening, the operatives have gathered crucial intelligence mapping out the supply chain vulnerabilities of NATO countries.
And all that intelligence gets funneled straight back to the state security apparatus.
Yep.
But this shadow influence goes way beyond just academia. They're actively funding massive political subversion. The reports document a $150 million operation specifically aimed at overthrowing Moldova's pro-Western government.
Which is a huge amount of money.
Right, moving $150 million into a foreign country without tripping every international banking alarm is incredibly hard. How do they actually pull that off?
They use these complex networks of dark money. So instead of normal bank wire transfers, they use cryptocurrency tumblers to anonymize the funds.
Wow.
They use offshore shell companies, networks of digital mules. They even physically funnel cash across borders using couriers, just handing out money to pay local citizens to stage protests and start riots.
That is so aggressive. And that destabilizing posture is moving into new areas too. The intelligence briefings highlight a really severe threat looming in Armenia for 2026.
Yeah, this is critical.
So the U.S. recently helped broker a peace deal between Armenia and Azerbaijan. And that deal is important because it paves the way for a brand new west-to-east global trade route.
A trade route that completely bypasses Russian territory,
Right.
which is the key. If global cargo can move from Asia to Europe without crossing Russian soil or paying their transit fees, the Kremlin loses a massive amount of geopolitical leverage.
And honestly, this is exactly why you, the listener, should care about this, even if Armenia feels like it's a million miles away.
Yeah.
If this new trade route opens, it makes global shipping cheaper and more reliable, which directly lowers inflation and the cost of goods for you.
Exactly.
But Russia cannot let that happen. The intelligence suggests they are planning a large-scale influence campaign to topple the Armenian prime minister this year, purely to disrupt that new trade route and keep their regional monopoly.
They are exploiting every single tool they can find to warp the global playing field. I mean, the reports even detail how they're relying on foreign technology now, specifically this Chinese AI model called DeepSeek.
Wait, how does a Chinese AI model help them?
It all comes down to the training data. When users in non-Western nations, the countries the Kremlin calls the global majority,
Right.
when they use this AI to ask questions about global security or historical events, the AI is literally programmed to suppress certain realities. It actively censors any information regarding Russian war crimes or aggression.
So it's basically laundering state propaganda through this shiny, seemingly neutral, high-tech interface.
Exactly. But here's the thing. This entire system, spending billions to build a digital iron curtain at home, burning through the budget to make artillery shells, funding all these shadow ops abroad.
Yeah.
It's incredibly fragile. It is all crashing into the reality of their own domestic population. The people are just exhausted, and the illusion of stability is really starting to break.
You can see it in the internal metrics. I mean, they are very revealing. Even the state-owned polling agencies, which, let's be real, historically inflate the numbers to make the leadership look good,
Always.
even they're admitting that the president's approval rating has dropped to 65.6%.
And that exhaustion isn't just political, it's physical fear. Society is living in absolute dread of returning combat veterans.
Yeah, the sources document that the military recruited between 150,000 and 200,000 convicted criminals straight out of the prison system.
It's staggering.
They gave them weapons, sent them to the front lines, and now the survivors are coming back to civilian streets.
And they're returning with severe psychological trauma. Plus, as we talked about, the hollowed-out civilian economy can't support them. There are no well-paying jobs for these guys outside of the defense factories.
And the public knows it. Current polling shows 39% of citizens actively fear a massive crime wave as these pardoned criminals flood back into their towns. People are terrified.
Right.
And the state's response to this anxiety is becoming, frankly, wildly erratic.
We are seeing a really sharp increase in bizarre, aggressive law enforcement actions.
Yeah, like armed police recently raided one of the country's major book publishers. They shut down their printing presses, and the excuse they used was that they were combating LGBTQ propaganda.
Right.
And at the same time, the state officially renamed a prominent security academy after Felix Dzerzhinsky.
The founder of the KGB.
Exactly, the architect of the Red Terror. They are literally erecting statues of historic secret police chiefs while simultaneously locking up the few independent journalists left in the country.
Because relying on the symbols of historical terror is a very specific, calculated political strategy. When a government can no longer provide economic prosperity or basic security for its people, the only tool they have left to maintain order is overt theatrical fear.
But let me ask you this. Putting up statues of secret police chiefs, busting big publishers, shutting off the internet, doesn't all of that actually prove the regime is terrified of its own citizens?
Oh, without question. A confident, secure government does not need to read its citizens' text messages. It doesn't need to raid bookstores.
Right.
This escalating level of repression just proves that the regime knows the public's tolerance for economic pain is reaching its absolute limit. They are acutely aware that if the population could just communicate freely and securely, the entire political structure could fracture.
Which is a perfect place to step back and look at the whole picture we've covered today. We explored the actual mechanics of this digital iron curtain, how those TSPU boxes rip open internet traffic to block VPNs, and how the Max app actively spies on the phones of local officials.
Yeah.
We saw how a 14.5% interest rate and this crazy labor shortage are bankrupting civilian businesses, all while the state just churns out millions of artillery shells. And we broke down the shadow diplomacy, from fake academic forums to dark money being used to disrupt global trade routes in Armenia.
It is a portrait of a state that is stretching itself to the absolute breaking point. I mean, they are attempting to exert total control over the minds of their own citizens while simultaneously trying to destabilize the entire global geopolitical map.
And history shows us that absolute control always comes at a terrible, usually unsustainable cost. So we want to leave you with a final, chilling question to think about on your own today.
Yeah.
Think about those deep packet inspection boxes, the restricted data plans, the wiretap messenger apps. What actually happens when a government succeeds in building the perfect digital cage, but completely runs out of money to feed the millions of people locked inside it?